Hey folks, this is with a gaming news wrap-up video where we discuss the happenings of the week. This week's topics include a game servers burning down, an unpopular Path of Exile update, some Diablo news, and more. As always, discussion timestamps can be found in the description below, but right before you skip ahead, just a quick reminder to ring that sub notification bell to be alerted to new Saturday episodes and stay up to date with gaming news highlights. Now, before we move on, a quick word from this video's sponsor, Opera GX, a web browser made for gamers. If you've come by my Twitch streams, you've seen that I've been using Opera GX for months now. With Opera GX, you can enable all kinds of integrations in the sidebar. Twitch integration will list all the channels you're following, showing who's live without you actually having to go to the website, and with a click, it'll take you there. Discord integration effectively lets you have Discord built right into your web browser. Then you've got all your messaging apps, Twitter, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, but that's not even the best part. GX Control is. Now, Chrome is always hogging my RAM because I keep about 80 million tabs open. With GX Control, you can enable a RAM limiter, a network limiter, a CPU limiter, all to limit how much the web browser will tax your computer, so you can still keep it open while gaming without impacting your game's performance. Opera GX also has a nice dark mode style, and you can fully customize the colors, and it also has a feature that forces dark mode on all pages you visit. They even have something called GX Corner that will keep you up to date on free game deals, as well as a built-in release calendar for upcoming games. So go ahead, follow the link in the video description to download Opera GX. It's free. And leave a comment with a hashtag InstalledGX and list what is the most important feature you look for in a web browser for gamers. In our first story, patch 905 launched for World of Warcraft. Amongst other things, this patch reintroduces Valor Points, allowing players to gear up more easily. With Valor Points, players can upgrade Mythic Plus dungeon gear to higher levels. And with these being added back into the game, players won't feel forced to have to participate in activities like PvP to get upgrades. Basically, it's a deterministic system that gives you small rewards for every Mythic Plus dungeon you run, so that you always feel like you're building towards a gear upgrade and not wasting your time. Determinism versus randomness will be a theme in this video. Stay tuned for a bigger talk about it in a few minutes. On to a news story about the survival game Rust. A story that should be of interest to all multiplayer gamers, because it brings into question just how safe our online characters really are. Something disastrous happened this week to some of the Rust servers. On March 9th, the devs tweeted, quote, "We are aware that some of our EU servers are down at the moment. Technicians at the data center are investigating the issue." The next tweet read, quote, "Update. 25 of our EU servers remain offline due to a fire at OVH data center in the early hours of this morning. Unfortunately, the fire destroyed SBG2 building. We're expecting a large amount of data loss across the affected servers. We'll share more news when we can." The next tweet read, quote, "Update. We've confirmed a total loss of the affected EU servers during the OVH data center fire. We're now exploring replacing the affected servers. Data will be unable to be restored." And they later clarified, quote, "When we referred to data in our prior tweets today, the data lost in question was only player progression on 25 servers." Oh, only 25. Okay. So basically, because of a building fire, some of the physical servers that stored player data were destroyed. And presumably any backups were in the same building and also died in the fire, and players lost everything. Now, thankfully, in the case of Rust, server wipes happen quite frequently, monthly or weekly, so only a few days of progress were lost. Cosmetic items are saved to your Steam inventory and not the game servers, so long-term cosmetic progression was not lost. So overall, this isn't a huge deal for most Rust players, but it begs the question, what if this had happened to a different game? An MMORPG where you've had characters for years. Presumably all devs should have backups, but how many devs have backups that are kept in different buildings? I'm sure some do, but this is something that most gamers don't think about. I think we just take for granted that our characters will always be safe. But then all it takes is one disaster that is completely out of our control, and we can lose hundreds or thousands of hours of progress we've sunk into a game. Onto some Microsoft news. Back in September of 2020, we reported that Microsoft announced they entered into an agreement to acquire ZeniMax Media and all its subsidiaries for $7.5 billion. Well, the deal has now gone through. That is all. Microsoft announced that the acquisition was completed on March 9th, and that ZeniMax had become part of the Xbox Game Studios group. As a result of the acquisition, most future games from ZeniMax and its studios will be exclusive to platforms supported by Xbox Game Pass, though Microsoft will allow studios to complete all current contractual obligations to release on other platforms. So this means that studios like Arcane Studios, Bethesda, id Software, and Machina Games are now owned by Microsoft, which includes, among others, the following properties: Dishonored, Fallout, The Elder Scrolls, Doom, and Wolfenstein. So good luck playing The Elder Scrolls 6 on a PlayStation. Let's move into action RPG news, starting with a super quick last Epoch update. Huge UI improvements are coming to the game. The devs shared a post that includes a new world map, link in the video description to check out more. In some quick Torchlight 3 news, the game is currently on sale for 50% off on Steam, and at that discount, that's an easy recommendation from me. I enjoyed Torchlight 3, and you can check out my video review for my full thoughts. On to some quick Lost Ark news. We got some new gameplay footage for the new Striker class, and it kind of reminds me of Diablo 3's Monk, dialed up to 11. On a completely unrelated note, a question for you folks: what are your thoughts on particle effects? I know some criticism was leveled at Diablo 3 for having too many. For myself, I have two main considerations. Firstly, visual noise. I want to always be able to clearly see and understand what is happening on screen, even when multiple characters are on screen. Second, I take the setting into consideration. Do these visuals fit with the setting? If it's some crazy high fantasy setting, then I expect more over-the-top particle effects than in a more realistic type of setting. On to some Wolcen news. The devs, who've been doing a good job at staying communicative in the past weeks, have released a blog post detailing their plans regarding improvements that they will be progressively implementing into Wolcen. This includes them working on adding controller support, more difficulty levels to Champion of Stormfall mode, pets will now pick up gold for you, loot filter improvements, more control over your summons, plus making summons more powerful, crafting system improvements, and my favorite change, quote, the dodge roll will allow you to go through enemies by default. The current related Gate of Fates node allowing it, Slipping Shadow, will be replaced by a movement speed buff after a dodge roll. As someone who really enjoys mobility, taking that node was almost mandatory, and I think the gameplay just feels so much smoother when you can dodge through enemies. Onto a big Path of Exile news story. The devs released a new manifesto discussing harvest crafting, and it's not being as well received as past dev updates. We'll go through some of the blog posts to get people caught up on the ongoing situation and the unpopular move the devs are planning. I'll link the full post in the video description. Quote, we're going to be making some further changes to harvest crafting with the release of 3.14.0 in April. In short, we're concerned by how deterministic some harvest crafts are and how easily players can craft near perfect items. We don't feel that is consistent with how Path of Exile's itemization should work. Now remember, we were talking about deterministic upgrades earlier when talking about World of Warcraft Valor Points. It does feel to me like a big difference between MMORPGs and ARPGs is that ARPGs tend to have less and fewer deterministic systems and more random systems. That is, an ARPG is more about trying to win the lottery, and an MMORPG is more about putting in your 9 to 5 to get your paycheck. But let's go on. Quote, using currency items like Exalted Orbs or Chaos Orbs on your gear is a powerful, risky, and exciting way to improve it. But because these items work equally well on both low and high level equipment, it's generally considered best to save them until you're crafting your end game gear. Many players would even argue that it's best to save them to trade for already crafted items. In either case, using valuable currency items on your leveling gear is generally perceived to be non-optimal. For anyone who may not know, Path of Exile has an economy based on certain crafting materials. These materials can be used to upgrade your gear, but these upgrades are highly random and it's unlikely that you'll get a good outcome. So these crafting materials are used as a currency, and many players will simply trade with other players for the gear they want, rather than risk wasting their currency and getting nothing of value in return. The devs went on to say, quote, "When we were designing the crafting mechanics that would be the reward system for Harvest League, we wanted to experiment with a system that allowed you to craft items while leveling using the equivalent of powerful currency like Exalted Orbs, so that players could get the experience of using valuable currency items without feeling bad that they were missing out on future value. Our goal was to make a system that was so attractive that players would try to improve their items by throwing a few crafts at them in almost every area that they play." This was a great objective and it saw great results. Players were crafting more than ever and enjoying crafting. But this did make it a lot easier for players to get good gear. The devs went on to write, quote, "The first part of this that concerned us was that Harvest was critical in making the best items, and hence made many other game systems obsolete. Our problem with all of this can be summarized with the following thought. Why would I use a regular Exalted, Divine, or a Null Orb when I can get one through Harvest that has a deterministic result? When we were designing Path of Exile, a critical aspect of item acquisition is that it is through random rather than deterministic means. In limited cases where you can choose a specific modifier, it's usually worse than what could have been rolled randomly. It's also important that items are hard to perfect. Ideally, there's significant diminishing returns in the currency item crafting process, which lets most players get something good enough relatively easily, and the expert players can show off with really good items that took a lot of effort to make. Obtaining perfect items is ideally close to impossible, with very few players able to claim that they have such valuable treasures. We feel that the current state of Harvest crafting runs against both of these important philosophies. We know that many players would love us to keep deterministic crafting in the game because it enables them to complete their items far more quickly than they otherwise would. But then there would quickly be nothing left to achieve. It was an interesting experiment, and we understand that some players will likely be attached to this level of incredibly easy crafting, but it's just not the Path of Exile we set out to make. This sentiment was summed up by a member of our design team who recently said, "We don't want to take away the feeling of closing your eyes and exalting an item, scared to see whether you ruined it or not." The devs then explained their plans for nerfing Harvest crafting, but what a lot of players specifically didn't like was the design philosophies being expressed in the post. Some players expressed that the issue isn't that Harvest crafting is too powerful, but rather that crafting through other means is just a bad experience. A lot of criticism was leveled at the use of the word exciting to describe using up a rare currency item in the hopes of getting a good result. And a popular sentiment was that the devs seemed out of touch with how people actually play the game. Now the issue there is that there are different types of players, and the devs are the only ones with full data and statistics on how people play. There are incredibly high-end players who are a minority. The streamers and people who play for over 5 hours a day. There are dedicated players who will try to play for at least an hour a day and will desire to keep playing throughout an entire league. And then there are the more casual players who will put in some time now and then, but they don't get particularly far or deep into the game. And the average player likely fits into this category. But it's the dedicated players who form the brunt of the game's daily player base throughout a league. And it can be difficult to balance the game for all these types of players. The complaints about the changes to Harvest seem to be coming mostly from dedicated players. Average players are unlikely to feel the effects of the nerf, and high-end players will still be able to achieve the same results just with more effort. But for the dedicated players, Harvest put in their grasp something that was previously just outside of it. Dedicated players are in a position where they can see, looking at high-end players, what they can achieve, but simply don't have the time for. Basically, there's been a general desire amongst some PoE players now for a while for more deterministic crafting. People are willing to pay higher crafting costs for guaranteed results rather than be at the mercy of randomness. Some people felt that Harvest gave them motivation to keep working towards something, since the result was assured, a form of long-term progression that would keep them playing throughout a league. What's funny is that on my Twitch stream, we recently had a talk about what differentiates crafting from gambling in an ARPG. By the way, I stream Monday, Wednesday, Fridays on Twitch. Do come by for discussions about ARPGs and game design in general. Now, there certainly was an acknowledgement from the community that Harvest crafting was powerful, and that when combined with trading, it could become too easy to get your endgame gear. A proposed solution then was to just prevent harvest-crafted items from being tradable. Overall, it's a difficult situation. What the community says certainly makes sense, but overall, GGG has done so much right over the years that it's earned the benefit of the doubt. Keeping this degree of deterministic crafting is something that players certainly like and want, but is it what's best for the game in the long term, or will keeping this result in a temporary rise in player happiness that results in players burning out on the game faster, having an overall negative impact on the number of players? I don't play enough PoE to know what the answer is in this case, but I find these design philosophy issues fascinating, and I'd love to know your thoughts. Sound off in the comments. Now onto some Blizzard news. We'll begin with a quick mention that Blizzard seems to be working on an unannounced AAA multiplayer game for PC and consoles, according to some new job listings. Based on these job listings, it looks like the game will be an FPS with new-gen graphics and a unique, innovative art style. One job listing is looking for a combat designer with, quote, broad, extensive player experience with FPS and action games, both single-player and online. Now, we know from industry insiders that there was a StarCraft FPS game in the works that was cancelled in summer of 2019 to move talent onto Overwatch 2 and Diablo 4. And while it's possible that this is a revival of that project, it seems more likely to be an entirely new IP, given the specificity of a, quote, unique, innovative art style. In other Blizzard news, we learned a couple extra tidbits from an interview that CNET conducted with Blizzard President J. Allen Brack and Senior Vice President Alan Adham. Speaking about the BlizzCon line reveals, Brack said, quote, most of the things, with one exception, and I'll say the exception is the Blizzard Arcade Collection, that we are working on, we were working on before the pandemic. These are not things that you can just kind of say, hey, it's retro time, let's go back in time and get in the Wayback Machine and make it all work. We've been working on Diablo 2 Remaster for more than 2 years now, and so it's sort of fortuitous. There's been speculation about the Diablo 2 Remaster for a long time, and this is the clearest timeline Blizzard has now given us regarding just how long it's been in development. 2 years ago means early 2019, and more than 2 years ago likely means 2018. Meanwhile, the rumor that D2R would be revealed at BlizzCon 2019 is not implausible, and it's also very possible that before BlizzCon 2018, when community manager Brandy Camel spoke about, quote, multiple teams working on multiple Diablo projects, one of those projects she was alluding to may in fact have been Diablo 2 Resurrected. It also seems as though this may be Blizzard's last remaster project, as Alan Adham stated, quote, it's worth pointing out, we're now pretty much out of things to remaster. So going forward, you can expect to see some new stuff. And speaking of Diablo, an unlisted video was found on the official Diablo YouTube channel, uploaded recently. It appears to contain the original recording of the devs making the moo-moo sounds for the cow level.
Okay. Moo. 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 Moo.
You can hear familiar moos along with chatter and director notes in the background. The video description itself reads, there is no video above. There is no man creating the moos for a level which does not exist. Reality melts in the depths of hell. Anything you hear is simply the flames distorting your last remaining shred of sanity. Because, as we all know, there is no cow level. In other Diablo 2 news, D2 mod project Diablo 2's new season began yesterday. Called Transcendence, this season includes a ton of balance changes, including the complete rework of the Assassin's martial arts tree, an overhaul of the crafting system, and 9 new maps for the endgame mapping system. Click the link for the full patch notes. And lastly, in Diablo 3 news, we got official word on the end date for Season 22, March 28th. A preview of Season 23 will come soon, but we currently have no start date. Our best guess is April 9th. If you haven't seen it, do check out my video review of the upcoming season over here. And that's gonna wrap up this week's video. But do be sure to have checked out last week's video in which we discussed the Diablo 2 Resurrected Alpha Key scams currently ongoing. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider pledging on YouTube or Patreon and unlocking behind-the-scenes content, monthly virtual hangouts, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. Check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Riker's Raiders for more gaming content.